how'd you start? Good question. Similar to this video now. This is the second episode of Great Togs Talk. I had to think there because I've got about a million things going, haven't we? Great Togs Talk, second episode, and as it was in the originals, bit of speech there, like how do you start? Where does it begin? When do you know your journey is at its beginning? When do you know where you're going? When does it actually begin? So obviously you've got myself again, Ryan here, got my mate Clarky there on my left, maybe your right, who knows?
Maybe someone's top or someone's bottom.
Some. We're here again, episode 2, to talk about, hopefully, where it can begin, possibly, or how it does begin. So we've been talking a fair bit over the last couple of days about how to address this correctly to make sure that we try and kind of identify different people's points, because I think the thing is, what we've clearly identified between our going backwards and forwards is everybody starts in a different place and everybody starts differently. And it's the how do you know where that beginning is? And again, I guess sometimes you don't, sometimes no. I think we had to have a good think about it, because you've got the idea of, does it begin at your first paid job? Does it begin at the first time you actually took a camera to somebody else? Where does it begin? And I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's two very different beginnings for both of us, isn't it? So that's why I think we've had more trouble not thinking how we were going to talk about this, but more putting it into a format that's digestible for people, because we don't want people to just be listening to a bit of it and go, it's too long. We want it to be something that someone takes something from. And again, going back to the last one, which I probably should have recapped what we talked about, because I know we touched on a lot of different things in that. More so, there's loads of little bits that we want to make into individual podcasts. Lost my train of thoughts already. Fucking hell, not good start, is it? The point was like making it so it's
all relatable. It's all relatable.
Making it digestible for anyone who's watching it, to look at two completely contrasting people. Like for me, I remember the point where I wanted to be a photographer, and at the point I decided I wanted to be a photographer, I had no experience in it whatsoever. I had a camera, but I was like, a little point and shoot Canon something or other, nothing like special. And most of the pictures that I'd taken in the prior several years of uni were all disposable cameras, where 60% of your photos aren't usable because your fingers across the flash or part of obstructing the lens, and you used to get those little stickers that the brutes would put on them for you. So for me, there was a distinct point that I remember walking along Crosby Beach and thinking, I really want to take a photo of that. I'd like to take that photo. That'd be good, because for me, I've always been slightly artistic, but never that I was happy with it. Like, I was always frustrated with whatever I was doing. Even at art GCSE in school, what was in my head never came out, and I had this weird idea that if I wanted to produce a photo, I could do that. Like, I could replicate what was in my head easier with a photo rather than with a pen and paper, which, some people have got amazing talent of literally drawing something to look photorealistic. And that's not necessarily what I wanted to do, but even like if I used to try and copy someone's drawings or cartoons, it never looked right. It used to really get on my tits. And I think that at some point translated over to me thinking, well, if I can do that as a photo, then that's how I can be the creative that I wanted to be.
That makes sense. Yeah, because I always like him for something, and I know obviously it is, but I think a lot of people maybe kind of lose the disconnection of how much of an art-based craft photography is. Like, obviously, there's an element of the technical side which can be taught, but the artistic side is what you wanted it to be. How did you envision it before it happened, type of thing, to some degree.
Yeah, and that that thought process then pushed me down a route that, again, this is nearly 20 years ago now, and this is again where it's good to contrast I was thinking about this morning when I knew we were, because obviously we've done that. This episode's been postponed for the last week or so for various reasons. And this morning I was thinking about how relevant is my beginnings going to be now, especially with how readily available being a photographer is to anybody who's got a decent camera on their phone, and also how, you know, DSLRs now are mirrorless. You can get hybrid, point and shoot cameras that do all manual settings. They can produce amazing images on par with what high-end professional stuff was producing 10 plus years ago. So for me, like, starting on film, and like in our conversation yesterday, I was rummaging around trying to find what my first film camera was. And do you know how I found out what it was? I went through my entire eBay sales history, all the emails in my inbox,
as if
looking for when I'd sold a Canon film camera. And I sold it, and I'm gutted now. I sold it only about 5 or 6 years ago, but it was a Canon C30 with like a 28 to 90mm kit lens on it, 35mm film. And then I went and did a photography. I failed university, dropped out, hated it. Went and did a photography course where they taught me how to use the camera. But then there was an element to that, like I got taught how to use a camera, but I didn't come out a proficient photographer. Do you know what I mean? I came out able to understand the technical elements of it, not necessarily how to go and take a great photo.
I think the question is, though, to that is what makes a proficient photographer? Like, and do you tell yourself that you are? Does somebody else tell you that you are? And obviously there's like, degrees and stuff like that you can take, and I imagine by the end of that you think, sound, I'm all right at that. But then for me, there's always the theory and application aspect. I went to college, was it last year or the year before, on a short-term kind of educational piece about photography, because I was always self-taught by YouTube. And the tutor there had a great theoretical understanding, knowledge of how supposedly certain images are made, which I'm not taking anything away from that particular person, but then in an application sense, when they're showing their sample images, they weren't great images. And then, I don't know, there's like a bit of a mix.
Yeah, so that takes me back. I mean,
we going off on one here?
No, I think this is totally relevant to how it's, again, well, this is leading me back to how I ended up in college. Okay. So I went to uni when I was 19. No, I don't know. How old you are when you go to uni? Because I felt I had to go to uni. Started on a business course, did a year of that, failed, dropped out on that. Started a media course, thinking, media does a bit of everything. Hated that. Managed to get into my second year somehow. And I was when I decided I didn't want to do uni. But I didn't want to start a new 3-year degree, because I'd done 3 years at uni and racked up a load of debt anyway. So I decided to go back to college. So I was 21 at the time. I don't know, I can't even do the maths, but I was around 20, 21.
Photographer, not a mathematician.
I went back to college with like a load of 17-year-olds where they were teaching, it was photography and digital media. So it was all about like, using Photoshop and stuff like that, but as well as the practical side of being in the darkroom. Now, I'd obviously done uni and pissed about, and it wasn't hard to be kind of a bright, shining bright star on this course, because there was a load of 17-year-olds that didn't have a fucking clue what they were doing, and they were just doing it for something to do, not because they wanted to do it. Whereas I started that course because I was like, I want to be a photographer. I wanted, and I absorbed everything, and like, but again, it was taking those steps of how I was going to make it work for me. And I think, again, that for me leads on to the contrasting ways that you and I have both become very different photographers.
No, I tend to agree with you there. I think, as you say, with the kind of the contrast now, I think the contrast between us two hopefully will speak for a lot of different, as we were saying before, how do you know where you begin, where there's not really a definitive answer, I don't think. Like, I think you just begin when you do. Because we were saying about, like, you know, what was your first job, what was your first camera and stuff like that. But I guess a lot of people become a photographer a lot before that. I know I certainly found that I was having a photographic kind of passion, if you like, before I even got a camera. As you say, with the love of, you know, smartphones and stuff like that. But even way beyond then, I remember getting an Argos, £30 or less. You might remember the advert. What is it? Polaroid cameras under £30. Remember? But they were £29.99. I had one of them. And that was, couldn't have been any earlier than like mid-90s, surely. So I think your photographic story, if you like, starts when you don't really realise it. And I mean, then as things develop, no pun intended, you know, like you do kind of get yourself on this real train of, I want to really pursue that. And I guess when you say, I want to pursue this, I guess that's where you start, maybe. I don't know. It's
again, well, I would agree with that, because for me, I would say, if you look at numbers from when totals, years from when I earned my first assistance paycheck, which was the first income I had as a photographer, that will have been around 2004. But I'll say I've been a photographer for probably since 2002, 2001, because that was when I made that decision. That's what I wanted to do.
When I left school.
Didn't, you know, certainly throughout college, like I didn't earn any money from photography through college. I was very much someone at first, like I said no to a lot of jobs out of fear of fucking it up. I didn't say that at the time. I was like, I don't want to do that. That's not the kind of photography I want to do. But it wasn't that. It was fear of fucking it up. Like, the amount of people I knew within a year or so of me saying I'm a photographer were like, I've got such and such getting married, or do you want to do this wedding? And I was like, no. I was like, no, I don't want to be a wedding photographer. And that wasn't because I didn't want to be a wedding photographer. It was through fear of not being prepared for it. But I think, yeah, for me, you know, that decision of that point in time where I say I've been a photographer, that's based on when I made that decision. Because from that point on, from then, for me, that was the biggest part of my life. Certainly, if you want to get down to brass tacks of saying income-wise, I've earned, you know, although I've had a few other bits and pieces in between, which I'm sure we'll come across in other talks about how you can survive as a photographer. Maybe photography has been my career, my chosen path for the best part of 2 decades. And I made that decision before I was paid to do a job. I'm just lucky that it's worked out for me.
No, I think, and that is the big contrast, isn't it? And I guess that's where hopefully we'll be able to kind of engulf and hopefully give a little bit of light to the different people on their different paths. Because as you said there, like you chose that. And I think for me, it kind of, even though I enjoyed it, I liked it, it kind of happened, I don't know what the correct word is, but it happened in a different way. Like it kind of, I didn't go, I want to pursue being a photographer. That kind of just came in with, you know, as life moved on, as my likes of certain things and dislikes of other things kind of evolved. That I just kind of grew up in this like new generational path of photographers, if you like, the ones who have an Instagram and got to put a couple of filters on it and really like the aesthetic of what can make an image. And then some people, not saying everyone, but some people do find themselves thinking, well, how much further can I take this? You know, is it worth me maybe pursuing this in some way? And it was just through a hobby, whereas yours seemed to be more a choice of occupation. Mine was more of a hobby. And I think there's a lot of people between those two pillars, if you like, who this will hit.
Yeah.
And my part was just, I had a bit of spare money one year, I think it was 2014, and just thought to myself, like, obviously I've had this like little inkling love of of photography now in some way. You know, can I take that next step? And then that was the purchase of the first SLR. That was the first proper camera I would say I had. And that was kind of not even, I wouldn't even say that was the start, because at the time I was just thinking, I'll just take some pictures of, like, you know, I've mentioned in the last one, like cityscapes, landscapes, family, you know, things like that. So it's difficult to say where your photography journey started. But then it was about 2 years of just messing around with learning the theory side of it, probably the thing that you went to university to do. So I was playing like a little bit of a mini catch up, if you like.
Would it just, sorry to interrupt on that though, it's like, I'll also have to correct, I didn't go to uni to do photography. I went to fucking college and did a fucking an HND level 3 or something. No, not an HND. What was it? I don't even know what certificate I got at the end of it, but it definitely wasn't a degree.
Okay.
It was a
educational based photography learning.
But it was a practical course, and that was what I wanted. Like, I'd looked at, and I'm not saying people shouldn't do this, I looked at photography, a university degree, and spoke to a couple of people about, you know, is there advantages to it? And it's kind of like that whole thing, if you can leave school at 16, get a job in a supermarket, and over 6 or 7 years could work your way up to like an assistant manager, or you can go to university and come out and get a job as an assistant manager. This is a really weird analogy, but my dad said this to me years ago. I can't remember what context it was in, but I've thought about it in so many ways. It's like learning to drive, having a week's intensive course versus doing, you know, 10, 12, 14 lessons over weeks where you do a little bit in between. Someone can teach you exactly how to drive a car, technically, but it takes time to learn, like,
how to
do it, or looking around you and observing things and knowing what to do in certain ways. And it's kind of like that with, you know, I went, instead of, I don't even know if it's going to make sense now, but I went down the route of the college course. It was like 2 years. It was very practical based. And the point was, I was lucky enough that I knew my dad knew people that I could get into some studios and just spend some time with some photographers and you know, and look at things that way and learn from the ground up. But even a lot of what I learned didn't mean anything until I physically was in the environment to do it. Like, I remember learning about depth of field and reading about it and having it in my hand, having a camera in my hand to kind of go and show I could demonstrate it. But I couldn't explain it to you at the time. I certainly couldn't explain it. Like, and it was really weird because it was like, I know what I'm doing, but I don't know how to explain to someone else. And that didn't really matter. My photo should have done that. But I had this thing in my head that I needed to be able to explain it. But I couldn't do that until I actually worked in a physical studio with someone. And Billy explained it to me very simply one day. In the same way that I never understood the offside rule until someone explained it to me using bottles of Budweiser. So
I just, funny enough, as you were saying it then, I was just thinking exactly from, I guess, like early school days when everyone used to, I wouldn't say joke about, but everyone used to kind of like rip into other people who couldn't, in a sentence, explain the offside rule. Like, and it was like everyone understood it. Everyone knew what offside was, i.e., you know, where you were and where they were to actually make the rule apply. But to explain it in a sentence was a different thing. We all played it. We were practicing it, but we weren't able to explain it. Probably, or some people weren't. Let's put it that way. I was one of them, by the way. I'm not going to like pretend.
Well, I mean, I know nothing about sport. Like, my daughter's an Evertonian because I don't care. She can make her own decisions. But like, there's a lot of elements to this. Like, I can do something, and I can show you can do it, but I can't. I couldn't explain it. And there's, you know, even like my assistant days. I don't know if we're losing the track of trying to explain how we became photographers with this, but, you know, I say I was lucky enough to be introduced with a photographer, and we just hit it off massively. And this is why I don't know how relevant my original origins is to people now, because I know when I was doing it, I think we covered this a little bit in the first one. I don't know if I cut it out or not, but I know how rare it was to be an assistant full time for someone. So I don't know if that's even rarer now. But those times of what I learned, and those practical elements of being surrounded by, this would be pre-digital as well, or pre-me shooting digital, surrounded by 35mm cameras, medium format cameras, large format cameras, and literally doing something by learning it was just invaluable, invaluable to me. Like, because I could be showing how to do something on a 10.8, 10.8 back, loading a 10.8 Polaroid into it, and deving the 10.8 Polaroid, and then changing the bellows and shooting at like f/45, shooting watches and rings and stuff. And like, I could turn around and tell someone how to do that then, because I'd done it, because I'd physically done it. And even now, it's like with new technologies, with what I'm doing a lot of the time, I've invested a lot more in technology over the last few years. And it's all well and good having it all, but unless you physically use it, certainly for me, it doesn't ever make any bloody sense.
But it's that I knew this would come in somewhere, because it's always relevant with photography and with anything. A lot of people have all the gear and no idea, and I guess that's another stage of being able to call yourself a photographer. We can all take great lucky images on our phones, and we can all take lucky images on our cameras. That happens still now, possibly even. But could you give someone that same device that they're using to take that particular image, and they call themselves something, and then put them in at different environments and be able to produce the same level of work? And
yes.
Probably not.
I could give you my camera, and you'll be able to figure it out, and I'll be able to figure yours out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get as great as images as spending time with something and learning about it properly and what it can do, especially with everything, all the bells and whistles we have now. Sometimes it does overcomplicate things. And some of my favorite photos are just taken with GoPros and phones, because they're just there in the moment and there's no complexity to it. It's, the auto feature works brilliantly, but if you want to set up and take a photo, if you want to look at something, I want to take this and I want it to look like this, you need to understand how it works.
Yeah.
Well,
I think we've been off, haven't we, a little bit?
No, I don't know. Again, I think this is the point of this video, is to talk about how we became photographers, and I think that's what we're doing. Like you I think I've talked more than you have, but it's about how that journey comes about and what decisions were made and where they were made. And you touched on yours before. 2014, you made the decision to buy a camera, and so that was really interesting for me as well. Because again, it shows the difference. And I think I've said this for you, but this is why I think my story, certainly for the beginning of my career, is going to be less relevant to people, because more people are going to be in your position where they can make that decision and buy something based on previous experience of taking photos with phones or little point and shoot cameras. Or there's always someone who's got an old DSLR now, 10, 15 years they've been kicking about, where they're kind of affordable. It's a much more approachable industry, I think, than it was certainly when I started looking at it 20 years ago.
I think if you speak to somebody, I remember walking through what was my local park in a previous house where we lived before we bought this one. I remember coming across some old fella who just see me. I had me older camera on me, just taking little shots of whatever really, and he just kind of happened to walk by, and his like wisdom and his like philosophy on it was that he had a digital camera, but he still preferred to use his old like a film camera that he had from like the Second World War or something. But he understood the position of like digital and its ability to be able to bring other people in that might not have necessarily been able to access it before. It's similar to a lot of things, isn't it? When technology becomes more affordable, the market becomes bigger because it's a lot more accessible to everybody. We had this discussion, didn't we, about those pictures that were taken on the moon. Now we really are going off. But the pictures that were taken on the moon or on Mars, like that particular camera that's used, that was sent like 3 years ago. How is it so good now, like 812K or whatever? But it's because that level of technology, even though now it probably is, that level of technology isn't as accessible easily to us as in the wider world.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Yeah.
no, I totally agree. But it's not even a but. I do totally agree. Like, I spent one point in the last 20 years, I spent a good few years working for a rather large tech giant, to call them.
By the way, I should have started like this, similar to you, because when you're small and that, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. I should have started here, so we both look at least the same.
It's all right. We can just shoehorn it in. But yeah, I spent a long time when got to a point in my photography career working for a photography company, and I fucking hated it. They made me hate taking pictures. I genuinely hated it. It was around the time Edie was born. I wanted something different, and then I ended up applying for. Hold on, I've got to get this. I have no idea where we were up to be fair.
I think we were going off on one about different things about like how people did academically. To like pull it back a little bit, I think what the best thing to do is to say that in that 2014 to 2016 period, I was just learning the foundations and learning from the Academy of Photography, which is a channel on YouTube. I think his name was Owen or Martin Tudor, and he was this like semi-broken English American fella who was basically helping people understand the technical side, so the rule of thirds and depth of field and things like that. So that's where I started learning the educational part. But it wasn't until 2016 when someone officially approached me to say, I like what you do. Can you do it for me? And I guess without realizing that was the kind of the starting point, or if you like the ignition towards me saying, I want to be a photographer. Like I want to pursue it as a thing. And I think that sentence maybe is the point of how it begins, or where it begins is when you tell yourself that this is what you want it to be. I kind of still doubted myself a bit, but I think I certainly had a clear thought in my mind that I want to make this bigger than what it currently is within my life. And working with Aiden, little shout, maybe we'll give him a tag. Not that, don't know, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But he, no disrespect, he was the kind of the one that pulled me out of that, like, just doing something for yourself to starting to do something for a reason, I guess, which is the whole maybe underlining kind of thing about photography is like, what are you doing it for? Are you doing it because you enjoy it? Are you doing it because you want to make money from it? Are you doing it because it gives you something to do? Like, there's a lot of different reasons. A lot of different people will find themselves in a lot of different wells. I'm not saying everyone needs to study photography to make money from it. But you need to really isolate your kind of what your path is within photography to understand where it begins.
Yeah.
I guess the well-rounded version of what I'm trying to say there.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that links in nicely just what's been bouncing around my head is kind of naivety of what I thought being a photographer would be. Like I was trained by someone who started out in the 60s, was a superstar throughout the 70s, the 80s, and very much into the 90s as well. Like he was booked up 6 months in advance. He used to travel the world, and his life was photographing, like, beautiful men and beautiful women, and in all exotic locations around the world. And I was like, yeah, I want to do this. And I didn't. There was a point where I didn't do. I think I touched on this before. Like I said no to weddings for a long time, where I was like, I don't want to do weddings. But it was genuinely. I look back at it now and I can hold my hands up and say it was fear. I didn't want to fuck someone's big day up because I didn't feel I was experienced enough. And I think we touched on this last time, or we've definitely talked about how you can postpone things because you don't think you've got the right gear for it.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's worth postponing things if you don't have the right experience for it. Like I know some horror stories of people who didn't, told me how, the cost they quoted him for a wedding was too high. I went with someone dirt cheap and horrible things happened with ill-prepared photographers. things can happen to, data loss can happen to you or me, but you be prepared for it, and you're okay. And I think I'm going off on a bit of a tangent there, but being prepared for a situation versus being equipped for it are two different things. And obviously experience comes from doing things, and I'm not saying don't do things because you're not ready for it, but you should definitely be aware of what you're taking on and the gravitas of needing to make sure that everything is going to go right with it. And it took me a long time to be in a position where I was like, you know what, I do want to do weddings, and it was a point where I was very excited to do them for a long time. And I'm not saying I was, really mega fucking super busy constantly with them, but it got to a point that I was doing what I felt was too many for me to enjoy them. I was doing too many edits at once, and I was really losing the passion and the focus for the one that I should have been doing, whereas I was still working on the next one and stuff like that. So that kind of understanding of what you want from it, like you're saying, like, do you want to be a photographer for reasons A, B, or C? I've been lucky to earn a living from it, and a lot of the time I've been lucky to be doing something I want to do, and that's what's made it so enjoyable. And I think this is where maybe we got cut off before when the phone started ringing, but one of the reasons I stepped away from photography for a while was because I was working for an established portrait company, and I just hated it, taking pictures for them. It was so much of a production line, and there was salesmen involved, and you didn't get to show the client your work, and that was, for me, I used to come home in a foul mood, and I hated taking pictures. And because I was still shooting a bit for myself at the time, I wasn't then enjoying doing my own work in an evening. So when it was about, it sounds stupid, when it was about stability and a regular wage, which is what that company gave me, that was the least enjoyable point in the last 20 years, nearly 20 years of photography for me.
I can weigh in massively on that, because I've felt as my little journey has gone on, and obviously I've skipped quite a substantial bit from where I was talking about before, the first person doing something for free, to now. Almost every single time, certainly up until recently, with pandemic hitting and not being able to do anything, every single time I took a camera out of a bag or some form of creative equipment, it was only ever to do work for somebody. And I know what you mean about you get into this strange, and it ties back again to what we were saying about an art before. A lot of people who are artists, i.e. painters, paint probably for their entire life, never sell a single piece, and absolutely love it. There's other artists who obviously paint for money, because they know that they've got a skill that they've been able to kind of educate themselves in, and have a natural ability for it as well, to be able to produce, artwork which is worth someone paying for. And such a strange place to find yourself in. And I think this is where, much like anything that anyone ever pursues, there's always a mindfulness of what your station is within that particular field or craft or whatever, because it's so hard to kind of, well, I don't think it's hard, but it's takes a lot of thought to identify where you are, where you sit, what you want to do, and where you want to do it within any niche. And photography is no different, probably more so, because it's a very in your head type of place. Sometimes you're very much on your own. Certainly if you're on a wedding, for example, you tend to be, I'd say 90% of the time, as a photographer, on your own, unless there's another photographer or a videographer on site. So you are. It's a very lonely place sometimes, but a nice place. So that's another thing.
It's interesting that you say it's a very lonely place, but can be a nice place, and I absolutely agree with that. But then there can be a sharp turn to the other side, which is, and maybe again, may touch on this last time, but I can't remember what I cut out on it. I was working with one person for a long time, and then was very selfish with that knowledge, and that was very, very insulated for me. And it wasn't. I had a little studio at one point for myself, and I was doing nice little bits of work, and I was enjoying myself. But then there was no one to bounce off, and I don't know if this is gonna fit in with this, and I don't know if it's like you, but there was a long time that I felt like people thought I was a good photographer because I was the only photographer they knew. And
now we're touching something.
like, I've recently turned 40, or recently in the last few months, and I think my mum would still love almost anything I did and stick it on the fridge if she could, which is nice, but it was never constructive. Whereas my dad was always someone who, like, he's worked in kind of fashion and he's worked with photographers and he's spent a lot of time in dealing with design. He was always very savage with me, which is what I needed to hear. And sometimes I'd show people work and they'd love it, and I'd be like, I'm not too sure. And that's not just from being self-critical, which I think you've got to be, but I just think sometimes you just need someone to tell you what you should do differently about it. Not necessarily what's wrong with it, but where you could improve. But as I say, I think for me, for a long time, I was the only photographer anyone knew, and that was sometimes maybe detrimental to being able to progress, because people were just loving what I'll give you a really stupid example. I'm obviously massively into my barbecue and I cook all year, and I do hugely like long 16, 18 hour cooks or some stuff. And I'm really critical of what I produce at the end of it. And my family, like my in-laws especially, are like, it's great, I don't know why you're so hard on yourself. But if I wasn't, I'd still be cooking the same shite I was cooking 2 years ago. Whereas now I'm cooking, some of the stuff I'm doing is like, absolute restaurant standard smokehouse stuff, better because restaurant standard shite most of the time. But
I wouldn't know, because I've never been able to sample any.
Well, that's because of COVID. Don't be blaming anything else. But the thing is with that, I push myself because, like, I'll follow a recipe to how it should be cooked, and if it doesn't turn out how it should be cooked, I'm disappointed. It doesn't matter whether everyone else thinks it's great. It's great because it's the best thing they've tasted like that.
I can see the connection you're making now. It makes a lot of sense.
That was a tangent. But
that ties back to before when you were saying about everyone likes the idea of being able to do something. Everyone can produce something by chance, but unless you've spent time investigating what it takes to make what you want being this, the key line, that's the fluffiness in between.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I'll probably draw a lot of comparisons to the way for me barbecuing, because that's like, I'm always been lucky that photography is my passion, and it's also my hobby. Excuse me, it's also my hobby, and I do have to draw a line somewhere with it. So you do have to draw a line sometimes with it to say, I'm not going to spend all day doing a job and all evening editing. I'm going to come home and I'm going to cut off and I'm going to spend time with the family. And I say that can be difficult when your hobby is your passion. And barbecuing was great for me because it gave me that second thing to go, right, photography's done. I'm going to spend this weekend cooking and have that break. But still, as long as I have that mentality that I'd like to push myself, again, coming back to why you and I have bounced off doing something together for the last couple of years, is to have that contrast and for someone to push you and for someone to say, have you thought about doing this way? What happens if you do it like this? And I am more than happy for someone to tell me something, or tell me a better way that I could be doing something.
That's how you get better, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and I think there was not a point where, like, some of my biggest clients, that portrait studio that I never really enjoyed working for and made me despise taking photos, is more accurate to put it. I came out to that and I'm an excellent or very proficient retoucher, because I was having to do some insane stuff of giving people teeth where they didn't have teeth and making them not look the size they were and stuff like that. So I came out of it with something really positive and productive. My most regular client now, who's my friends, I'm good friends with Robert RS Prop Masters, who I produce weekly YouTube content for. 2 years of producing these videos. We keep doing stuff because he wants to do something and I have to learn how to do it. That's a really, really good way to learn. It can be really fucking frustrating. Like, it can be massively frustrating, but doing something because someone else wants to do it is, for me, the best way to learn anything. Like, we did something the other week where we had a chair in the front and a couch in the back, and Rob was on the couch and he was in the chair, and I hated the video. I absolutely hated it. I hated shooting it. I hated editing it. And it looked awful as far as I was concerned. But people were messaging me going, that was really good. How did you do that? And I'm like, I still can't see past what we did to produce it. But I only did it because I was pushed. I don't mean pushed into doing it. because at the end of the day, it's a client, you know, you still got to do what the client wants sometimes, although I'll stand my ground and say this is a load of shite. But it's really good to then get the feedback of someone when someone's kind of pushed you out of your comfort zone to produce something. And it's not perfect, it's got a long way to go, and we're going to do something like that again. But to be pushed like that and have then other people unrelated to it recognise that you've done something different, that's really good. And if it wasn't for putting yourself, or me putting myself in situations like that, I don't know where it'd be as a photographer if I would still be one. This again for us, this channel, and it'll be interesting how this dynamic works when we're not sat opposite each other. When we're not sat opposite cameras talking to each other, when we're doing something together, because this dynamic is what I think is important to grow. And if that's my ultimate goal for us doing this, when I said to you, however many months ago, let's do a video podcast about photography, it's about learning from each other and then hopefully someone else learning something from us. And again, from my point of view, even if it's out not to do something, you know, we've got episode ideas in mind. I could talk all day and bore you to death about data protection, data loss, and data management. It's massively important, that stuff like that. And if you can learn something from it, then fucking brilliant. Let's wrap it up.
Do you know what? It's funny, really, because I think it's a strange one, because I think obviously we're building in our heads, what can we give to an audience to help them in some way, whether that provides a technical knowledge or, you know, a kind of an experience that we've done to help them out. But at the same time, because we're maybe, I wouldn't say we're focusing too much on that, but I think we might sometimes, or some people might sometimes, lose the authenticness of what it is that they're trying to produce. And I think we've done it hopefully in the right way, because we have just generally spoken. And, you know, there has been touching points that I think people will go, oh yeah, or will go, oh, I'm not into that, and then that difference of opinion, I guess, is what drives the need to kind of speak in the way that we do, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe, I mean, you know, I spent 2 years building this channel with RS, and I thought it'd be way easier than it would be, considering the social media following I had to begin with, and it wasn't. And maybe last few days we've been speaking, maybe I'm focusing too much on trying to keep it structured and keep it punchy. Maybe we just need to see if anyone watches the whole thing and what the feedback is on it, rather than trying to stick to these.
I think what a lot of people do is and I think the best way to do it is, I said this to someone the other day, a girl who I was speaking to about being on my other podcast, Connect Your Dots, by the way, little plug. I was talking to her about, she was apprehensive about coming on and talking on my other one, because she felt that she wasn't able to provide value to the listeners, because she thought the words speaking, pointing out there, she thought she wouldn't be engaging enough and interesting enough. But as I said to her about listening to what I'd hear somewhere else, it's like you're grading your own homework. You know, you're basing it on your idea. Whereas I think what the best way to do is to let the audience decide, whoever that audience may be, whether it's one person or 1,000 people. Let them be the judge. And I understand now why, having not had a YouTube channel myself before, really, why a lot of these bigger ones, and we'll get this person's name referenced into every show, I'm sure, why the likes of your Peter McKinnons and all of that actually always say things like, you know, put it in the comments, let me know what you think, you know, not necessarily like and share. I think that's maybe a different thing, but certainly asking for that feedback is a great indicator of how you shape up what you're saying to a degree. Because I think if you talk on absolute nothing, you know, you're not captivating anyone, you're not engaging anyone. And the whole point of what I think this is, from my point of view, and certainly you, is it needs to be engaging, it needs to be helpful, the access to understand is the main driver, the key goal, I think.
My battery's gonna die on the camera.
It's good job I got all that boss bit in then.
Talking about being organised and be slagging you off before.
The comments need to be filled with what somebody might think or not think about what we say, to be able to drive this in the direction that we want it to go, which sounds very strange, but we're taking other people's ideals or thoughts and adapting them with what we think we should do, because there's no point in us thinking this is what we want, because what we want might necessarily be what other people want. See where I'm going?
I do, but at the same time, I want to do something that would have helped me 5-10 years ago if it was available.
Yeah, no. But what I'm saying is, like, we can cap off that, because no matter what other people will wade in with, we will be able to give our experiences of, i.e., therefore you're still helping yourself by helping them. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Very loosely.
Well, no, because that's the whole point, isn't it? It's what can we do to give that little bit back. Whereas I've definitely been someone who's taken all the tutorials or the little tidbits I can over the years, and it's good to be able to give back some of what I've learned through my own experiences, and also to give back from all these other people who do it. Would it be good to be able to do something that generates some kind of income for this? Of course it would, but we're doing this because we want to do something, and this is our way of doing it. And if it benefits other people, it will benefit us. But if anyone wants to sponsor us, then leave a comment down below. Yeah, well, tune in next week when we're going to try and get ahead, aren't we? We're going to try and shoot another video this week.
I think that comment back from people is invaluable, and I think sometimes people are a little bit too afraid to actually say what they think. And hopefully this is another thing that gets pulled out of this, is that you should never be afraid to actually speak openly and to question and to want to learn. And the only way to learn is to ask the questions of not only yourself but the people that you're learning from. How many times you sit in a classroom as a kid or as an adult, and the teacher will give out loads of theory-based loads of theory-based information, and they'll say, does anyone have any questions? And as adults, we've kind of lost that, put your hand up, I've got a question. And if you don't, often you find yourself not knowing the answer to what you wanted. So the comments, what I was leading on to before, is an invaluable way for people to ask questions, for us to be able to give you the answer if we know it. Yeah. And I guess if we don't know it, even better in a small way, because that means we've found a part of our knowledge, if you like, that there's a little bit of a drop, and that helps us to help ourselves and to help you as an audience. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but I guess you can kind of see you can kind of get the idea behind that.
So comment below if you've enjoyed this. Comment below what you didn't like about it, and comment below what you'd like to see us talk about again, or what you'd like to see us go out and do in the big wide world when we can. I'm going to go because I'm actually going to do some work.
So am I. Watch.
Yeah, so comment below, let us know what you're thinking, if it's enjoyable. If you don't enjoy it, tell us what you don't enjoy, unless it's like you don't enjoy us, because we can't really do anything about it.
Well, shibby.
Sound, right? That's it, we're done.
Thanks very much. Episode 2 over, episode 3 to begin. Let's see where it goes. Great Togs Talk, episode 2. Thank you very much.
Peace.
Shh.
That doesn't work when the two of us on screen.